A vast Wyoming valley stretched under a sky so wide it could swallow a man whole. Wind rolled across the open plain, dragging dust, whispers, and forgotten memories in its wake. Cattle grazed slowly, indifferent to the stillness that hung over the Maddox ranch like an old quilt. Clint Maddox stood alone outside the weather-beaten barn, framed against the sun like a mountain that refused to move. He was enormous, broad in the shoulders, arms like fence posts, face carved from time and quiet sorrow. His Stetson shadowed his eyes, but not the deep, tired lines that told of years spent with only animals and ghosts for company. He moved with the economy of someone who had done the same work for decades. Muck the stalls, check the feed, fix the damn fence again. His boots thudded with a rhythm older than the ranch itself. 17 years of silence, give or take a few words muttered to cows that didn't care. That's how long it had been since Mary. Since her hands had been on his shoulders. Since someone had looked at him like he wasn't just a part of the land, but a man worth loving. Inside the barn, the air was heavy with hay and the soft, warm scent of livestock. A faded photograph was nailed above the tool bench, Mary, all sunlight and wild hair, laughing at something that wasn't funny, just beautiful. Dust gathered thick around the frame, but Clint never wiped it clean. What was the point? The dust belonged, just like he did. He stood there for a long moment, eyes lingering on the photo. Then he grunted low in his throat, like he was trying to swallow something sharp, and went back to work. The cows needed him, the fences always broke, and the world, as far as Clint was concerned, had stopped knocking on his door a long time ago. A long plume of dust twisted into the air as an old red pickup rattled up the gravel path toward the Maddox ranch. The late afternoon sun hit the windshield just right, turning it gold and blinding. Grasshoppers scattered from the tire tracks. Somewhere, a hawk called out, circling overhead. Clint Maddox was elbow deep in a feed bin when he heard the engine. He froze for a moment, as if his body couldn't quite believe someone was actually coming up that road. Then he straightened, his silhouette filling the barn door like a boulder in a stream. He wiped his hands on his jeans, squinting against the glare. The truck came to a stop with a dramatic gasp of brakes and a metallic clatter that sounded like it hadn't been serviced in years. 3 girls jumped out, all looking like they'd taken a wrong turn on their way to a college campus, too clean, too wide-eyed, too full of purpose for a place like this. The tallest of the 3 stepped forward first. Emma had a determined jaw, practical boots, and a clipboard in her hand. She looked like she knew exactly how to get into trouble and talk her way out of it. Riley followed behind, wearing a denim jacket covered in patches and paint stains. She had a sketchbook under one arm and the loose stride of someone who didn't plan to do anything the usual way. Tasha brought up the rear, quiet, clutching a camera and scanning everything like the lens could keep her safe from the unknown. Emma cleared her throat. Hi, you must be Mr. Maddox, Clint Maddox. Clint didn't answer right away. He gave them one slow glance, taking in their clean hands, light luggage, and the way they stood too close together, like they were holding on to the last bit of civilization they had left. You lost? He asked, his voice low, rusty, barely more than a growl. No, sir, Emma said, smiling politely. We're the interns, from the state university, pre-vet program. You agreed to take us for the summer. Clint crossed his arms. I agreed to let one kid help with vaccinations. Didn't say. Nothing about a sorority carpool. Riley grinned, stepping forward and squinting up at him. We're fast learners. We just want the full experience. And, we were wondering if we could start by milking the cows. Behind her, Tasha was already filming. The lens glinted in the sun. Clint stared at them, unreadable. His jaw moved slightly, like he was chewing on something invisible. Then he turned and walked back into the barn without a word. The girls looked at each other. I think that's a yes, Riley whispered. I think that's a warning, Emma muttered, and followed. Inside the barn, the air was thick and warm. The cows shuffled in their stalls, curious. Tools hung on nails, rope coiled like sleeping snakes. Clint stood beside the biggest Holstein, watching them over his shoulder as they stepped in, tentative. You ever even touched a cow? He asked, not unkindly. Once, Riley said, at a petting zoo. Clint exhaled through his nose, part sigh, part laugh, like he was remembering something he hadn't meant to. Then he motioned to a stool beside the cow. The girls moved in closer, wide-eyed and trying not to look completely clueless. The dust outside settled, the sun slipped lower, and for the first time in 17 years, Clint Maddox wasn't alone in his barn. The barn filled with a soft rustling of hay and the occasional bewildered lowing of a cow as the girls fumbled their way through their first milking lesson. The air smelled of animals and earth, tinged with the faint sweetness of alfalfa and the distant promise of rain. Emma crouched by one of the Holsteins, tongue sticking slightly out the side of her mouth as she squinted at the udder like it was a puzzle box. Her sleeves were rolled up, but the cuffs of her jeans were already soaked from stepping into a water trough earlier. She reached out tentatively and gave the teat an awkward tug. Nothing happened. I swear I watched a video about this, she muttered. Riley was sitting nearby, sketchbook tossed aside, a smear of milk on her cheek where she'd apparently underestimated the cow's tail swing radius. Pretty sure the video didn't tell you to milk it like you're trying to tune a guitar. Tasha, behind the camera as always, zoomed in on Emma's failed attempts. Day 2, she narrated in a low voice, the cows remain unconvinced by our efforts. Confidence is at an all-time low. In the corner of the barn, Clint leaned against a post, arms crossed, expression unreadable. He didn't offer to help. Not yet. His eyes moved from girl to girl like he was trying to decide whether to speak or let them suffer their way to understanding. The cows were patient, at least. Far more than he'd expected. Finally, after watching Riley nearly knock over a bucket and Emma utter her third curse word, Clint sighed, loud enough for them to hear. He walked over slowly, boots thudding on the packed earth. Without saying a word, he nudged Emma gently to the side and lowered himself onto the stool with surprising grace for someone his size. He didn't explain, he just showed. His large, rough hands moved with quiet ease, firm, practiced, respectful. In seconds, milk hissed rhythmically into the pail below. Not a pump, he said finally. You're not squeezing toothpaste. Think of it like coaxing it out. Not taking it. Emma blinked. Like seducing the cow. Clint gave her a sideways glance, completely unamused. Don't talk. Riley snorted, trying to stifle her laugh. He motioned for Emma to try again, this time guiding her hands gently. His fingers wrapped around hers, and for a split second, the contact made her freeze. There was nothing romantic in the touch. It was matter of fact, direct, but something about it held weight, like touching river stones that hadn't moved in years. Tasha kept filming quietly, camera steady. She didn't say anything, but she noticed it too. The slight shift, the crack in the silence. Later, when the sun had dipped low and the barn glowed amber in the fading light, the four of them sat outside on overturned buckets around a small fire pit. Emma passed around a bottle of cheap whiskey she'd smuggled in from town, and to their surprise, Clint didn't refuse it. He took a small sip, stared at the fire for a long time. You're not as scary as you look, you know, Emma said, nudging his boot with hers. Clint didn't look at her. Don't believe everything you see. You live out here all alone? Riley asked, voice soft now. Clint gave a slow nod. Why? He took another sip. The fire popped, and a long silence stretched between them. Most people break things just by touching them, he said. Cows don't ask much. Dirt's honest. Tasha looked up from her camera. You think people aren't? Clint didn't answer. He just stared into the flames, jaw clenched, as if searching them for something long buried. No one pushed him. They just sat, the quiet between them growing less uncomfortable, more like a blanket thrown over something wounded. Behind them, in the barn, the cows settled down for the night. And in the dark, in spoken air, something old began to shift. Not a lot, just enough. Morning came soft and golden over the Maddox ranch, spilling light across the fields in long, honey-colored stripes. The girls were up before the sun now, boots muddy, hands calloused, laughter easy. The cows knew them by scent and sound. The land, once silent, hummed with motion and voices. The barn, which had echoed with nothing but creaks and lowing for years, had come alive again. Clint watched it all from the porch, coffee in hand, hat pulled low over his eyes. A dog-eared paperback lay unread on his lap. He didn't say much, but he was there every morning now, not just as a shadow behind the barn but as a presence among them. Something had changed. Slow, quiet, but undeniable. They hadn't fixed him. They weren't trying to. But somehow, by just being, they'd nudged him a little back toward the world. Emma now moved through the barn like she'd been born there, sleeves rolled up, hair in a braid, bucket swinging from one hand. She carried herself like a woman with purpose, and Clint had caught himself watching her, not with hunger, not with sadness, just recognition. Like someone who finally heard music after years of silence. Riley had painted a mural on the side of the barn, a sweeping, wild thing with streaks of sky, long-horned cows, and a giant figure standing alone in a field. She hadn't asked permission. Clint hadn't said a word, but every time he walked past it, he looked up just a little longer than necessary. Tasha had nearly finished her documentary. She filmed everything. Morning routines, cow births, quiet dinners, even Clint sharpening tools with that weathered, hypnotic rhythm. She captured the way his hands trembled slightly when he held the whiskey bottle. She caught the way he smiled when he thought no one was looking. On a quiet afternoon, as clouds gathered on the horizon and thunder grumbled far away, she cornered him by the fence line. Final scene, she said, lifting the camera to her eye. You're the last piece. Clint raised an eyebrow. What, you want me to say something profound? Just be still, she said. Let the world see you. He hesitated, then nodded. He turned toward the hills, arms folded over the rail, hat pulled back slightly. The wind caught the edges of his shirt. For once, he didn't tense at being seen. He just let it happen. As the light softened, Tasha lowered the camera. Why'd you let us come? She asked, voice low. Clint didn't answer. Right away, he stared out over the land he'd walked alone for almost 2 decades. I didn't, he said finally. You just showed up. She smiled, quiet. Sometimes that's all it takes. That evening, the sky turned violet and gold. The girls set up dinner outside, chili in tin bowls, cornbread still steaming. Clint joined them without being asked. Riley played music from her phone, something slow and dusty that sounded like home. Laughter rose and drifted out into the wide Wyoming dusk. As they ate, Emma reached across the table to pass him the cornbread. His fingers brushed hers, just a second, maybe less. But he didn't pull away. She didn't either. No one said anything. No one needed to. Later, as the fire cracked and the cows bedded down in the barn behind them, Clint leaned back in his chair, staring up at the stars like he hadn't done in years. The air was warm, full of hay and wood smoke and the faint scent of paint. He could hear them talking, the girls, their voices soft and close. He didn't catch every word,